You know that feeling? You're staring at a painting or reading a poem, and you think, am I supposed to be having some kind of special experience right now? Well, for hundreds of years, the experts would have told you absolutely. But what if that whole idea is, well, a myth? Today, we're going to talk about I.A. Richards, a guy who basically took a sledgehammer to the whole ivory tower of art criticism. So, here's the game plan. First, we'll get to know Richards himself. Then, we'll dive into the absolute chaos he saw in the world of criticism. We'll look at his solution, which was all about psychology. Then, the fun part. We're going to bust this myth he called the phantom aesthetic state. And finally, we'll see why his ideas from 100 years ago are seriously more important than ever. All right, so first up, who was this guy who had the guts to challenge centuries of how we talk about art? Let's find out. So here he is, Ivor Armstrong Richards. On paper, he was an English critic, a poet, an educator, the whole academic package. But the thing that really made him different was his obsession with psychology. And that led him to ask this really radical question. What if the value of art isn't in the thing, the painting, the book, but in what happens inside our heads when we experience it? Okay, so let's try to see the world through Richard's eyes for a minute. And what he saw, especially when it came to literary criticism, was, well, a total disaster, a complete mess. Richards actually used this fantastic line from Shakespeare to make his point. Oh, monstrous, but 1/2 pennyworth of bread to this intolerable deal of sack. Now, sack is just an old-timey wine. For him, all the flowery, confusing language critics used, that was the intolerable deal of sack. And the actual substance, the real meaning, that was the tiny, pathetic 1/2 pennyworth of bread. He was basically saying critics were getting everyone drunk on fancy words with almost nothing real to chew on. And yeah, he really didn't hold back. He called the whole field of criticism an almost empty garner. Think of it like a giant barn that's supposed to be full of grain, but it's practically empty. He saw it as just a big jumble of conjectures, brilliant guesses, personal whims, and a whole lot of what he called mysticism. Basically, zero solid ground. I mean, think about it. Critics couldn't even agree on the most basic stuff. You'd have one person saying a poem was a work of sublime beauty, and another looking at the exact same poem and calling it sentimental drivel. How do you even have a conversation then? There was no common ground, no shared language, no method to the madness. It was just chaos. So what's the fix for that kind of mess? Well, Richards' answer was pretty brilliant. He decided to just change the question completely. He proposed a massive shift in focus. And this right here, this is his big move. The old way was all about trying to guess what the artist was thinking or getting into these endless debates about abstract ideas like beauty. Richards basically said, nope, let's stop doing that. His new approach? Let's look at the one thing we can actually observe and analyze, the psychological experience happening inside the reader's head. He wanted to swap out vague intuition for a real psychological framework. So he wasn't asking, what is beauty anymore? He was asking, what makes an experience valuable? See the shift? It's huge. Now, with this new psychological toolkit, Richards was ready to go after a really big target, one of the most sacred, long-held beliefs in the entire world of art. Okay, so for centuries, you had all these big-name thinkers arguing that when you experience real art, your mind enters this special zone, a unique aesthetic mood of pure contemplation. A totally separate, almost magical state that has nothing to do with regular life. Richards thought this was nonsense, and he gave it this amazing, cutting name, the phantom aesthetic state. And then he just asked this simple but totally devastating question. But is there any such thing? Does this special, walled-off mental state even exist? His answer? A hard no. Unequivocal. There is no magic art bubble. And his reasoning was actually pretty straightforward. When you look at a painting or read a poem, you're not activating some secret art module in your brain. You're using the exact same mental and emotional equipment you use to, decide what to have for dinner or navigate a tough conversation. The only real difference, he said, is that art often organizes those everyday thoughts and feelings in a way that's more complex and more unified. It's a difference of degree, not of kind. Because here's the danger he saw. If you insist that art lives in this special, separate world, you cut it off from real life. It becomes what he called a private heaven for aesthetes, just some mystical, ineffable thing for a handful of fancy people with no connection to the messy, complicated world the rest of us actually live in. All right, so this was all happening about 100 years ago. Why should we care? What does this mean for us right now? Let's wrap this up by looking at why it matters so much. By tearing down this idea of a phantom estate, Richards did something truly profound. He plugged art back into life. He said art isn't valuable because it's an escape from the world. It's valuable because it helps us organize our thoughts, our impulses, our emotions within the world. It's not an escape, it's a tool for living. So this really pulls it all together. You start with chaos. Criticism was a subjective mess. His solution? Shift the focus to the reader's psychology. And the impact? It completely regrounded the value of art and our actual lived experience. He brought art down from the ivory tower. And this idea, focusing on the text itself and our response to it, instead of, say, the author's life story, that became a huge part of what's called New Criticism. It literally changed how literature was taught for decades. And this leaves us with a really powerful question, especially for today. We live in an age of algorithms, of AI-generated art, where the artist's mind might literally be a machine. In a world like that, Richards' focus on the value of the human experience feels more urgent than ever. How do we decide what's good, what's worth our time? Maybe the answer isn't in the prompt or the code. Maybe it's exactly where Richards told us to look a century ago, inside our own heads. So the real question is, what is a valuable experience to you?